Hi and welcome back to Garden Ninja for the October garden tour. The leaves are falling off the trees, autumn is well and truly underway, but there's still plenty to be doing in your own gardens to help keep things looking neat and tidy. So in this guide I'm going to be showing you what I'm up to in the month of October to give you a bit of inspiration for your own gardens. So come on, let's get cracking. Now, hopefully you can see this. It's my pumpkin that I've been growing in this container. It's ready to harvest. It's not going to get any bigger. So I'm just going to snip it off at the very top. Get rid of that little worm. And there we go. Halloween is ready to go. By the time we get to October in the UK, most of our annual veg has come to an end, with the exception of a few winter crops. Now, if you've watched my other videos, you'll have known that I've been experimenting with squashes and pumpkins in containers, and I've had some really good success. However, it's October, the leaves are looking really tatty. There are still a few small fruits, but they've not got enough time to really mature and grow, so there's no point holding out for them. So what I'm going to do today is tidy these all away. I'm going to cut them back to the bases, put all the foliage on the compost bin, and although the compost bins are slowing down now, it will act as a bit of protection and will slowly rot down on the top. So you can recycle all of this, and it's a really good method of getting rid of your garden waste without sending it to landfill or to big recycling processing plants. So what I'm going to do is take a sharp pair of secateurs and just start cutting up the squash into smaller bits, which will help it break down a lot more readily in the compost bin. And I'm just using a wheelbarrow, but you could use a trug or a bucket, whatever you need to carry them. But try and be economical in that there's no point making 600 trips to the compost bin when you could make 4 or 5 by filling a wheelbarrow or a canister. I'm just going to nip them all away. They've given me a good show, but it's time to go. Now, October is a great time to do this with any vegetables that are finished. You can do it with peas, beans, squashes, pumpkins that you've already harvested, any kind of outdoor veg. If you're planting things like winter kale, winter broccoli, obviously you don't want to cut them back because they've not fruited or flowered yet, but for things like this, now's a really good time. And I always find it quite amazing that you can grow things like this from a seed in a single season, and it does show you the incredible power of Mother Nature. And if you think about all those chemical reactions that have had to occur to get the seed to germinate, put on growth, flower, become pollinated, create a fruit or a vegetable, ripen, and then be harvested, it's a real roller coaster of a year for fruit and veg. And I always like to think of that and think, wow, you know, how incredible that we can grow all these, even in small containers, no matter what size of your garden. So it's not just your seasonal vegetables that you can cut back. I've got a load of herbaceous perennials that I've cut back here because they're just past the best. They're not going to flower again, and if I leave them, they're just going to look tatty. Now I tend to have a bit of a 50-50 approach. Some of the herbaceous perennials like grasses, maybe some of the echinacea and almost like the daisy family, I will leave throughout the winter, even when they crisp up. And that's because they look really nice and architectural. But other things like lupins and verbascum, things like that, start to look really messy. So I go with a 50-50 approach of taking out sort of 50% of anything that's spent and leaving a bit for seasonal interest, for winter wildlife, and also a bit of structure. All of this can go in the compost heap along with those squashes and pumpkin prunings. Come on, Basbo. So you may remember that earlier on in the year I planted a new tree, and it was this, a liquid amber, also known as an American sweet gum, and I was going on about how it was going to turn a blood red colour in the autumn and add real fire to the garden. And look at it now, it's October, the leaves have gone blood red as expected, and it really draws your eye in from the house. Now these leaves are going to fall off because it's a deciduous tree, but it does give you a real wow at this time of year, and it's going to get really big. So over the years, as it grows older and older, it's going to get bigger and bigger, and this big red burning bush is going to symbolise that autumn is here, but also give a little bit of fire to the garden. Now talking of blood red, check this out. It's a Euonymus alatus, and I planted it a few years ago now. Now this is actually known as the burning bush, and you can see why. For most of the year it has a green leaf, and then come autumn it turns this vivid puce, almost like blood red, a bit of candy floss going in there as well. What you'll notice is I've got this here, the liquid amber is behind it, and you can now start to see how these eye hooks link together. And by using colour in your garden in this way, you can help give it, yes, that's right, consistency. And I'm always banging on about being consistent and using repetition. Well, even though these are two separate specimens, they've got a similar colour. So by its very nature, it's bringing that consistency to the garden. So if you want to give a real punch to your borders, make sure you're using that repetition and consistency, even if it's just the colours that you use. Now there's been another brutal prune this month, which is here. This is what I call the Granny's Garden border. It's full of climbing roses, Group 3 clematis, we've got all sorts of delphiniums and lupins, but by the time we get to the end of September they've pretty much all had it. So rather than wait and cling on, I've been brave. I've hard pruned the clematis back to about 6 to 8 inches above the ground. As you can see, all the trellis is now bare, but what that will do with the Group 3 clematis, which are the late flowering ones, is it will spur it on next year to provide equal flowers. If I'd have left the clematis up there, whilst it may have looked nice for another month or so, you would probably only start to get the flowers at the top on the new growth. So you need to be brutal, but it will look far better next summer than if I just left it to look all tatty and tangled over winter. So it's also the time of year when you can do some maintenance pruning on certain fruit trees, with the exception of plums. If you're dealing with plums or any fruit tree from the Prunus family, then you need to make sure that you only prune in the spring, and that's because they can get silverleaf disease during the winter. Now, I was asked a question on Twitter by someone who planted a new fruit tree this year and had found a mysterious stem growing from the base, and they asked what to do with it. Now I, funnily enough, have one as well over on my green gauge, and I'm going to walk over now and explain exactly what that mysterious shoot really is. So here is a mysterious shoot in question. Now this is a green gauge fruit tree that I planted this year, and it is part of the same Prunus family that the plum trees are from as well. So you do have to be cautious when pruning these in the winter due to silverleaf, and ideally you wait till spring. But the question I was asked is, what is this growing from the very base of the fruit tree? And if I unwrap it and I'll show you closer, you'll notice that most fruit trees, in fact nearly all of them, have been grafted. Now I've got a video on some fruit trees that I grafted a few years ago, so you can check back and see how that's done. And what a graft is it's a section of a fruit tree, and you cut a section off when it's fresh and leafy early in the spring, and that's called a scion, and then you graft it to a different rootstock. And the reason for that is that a lot of fruit trees, if they were left native, would grow huge. So you graft them onto smaller rootstocks to reduce their vigour and to kind of control their shape and push more energy into fruit rather than big voluminous green growth. So nearly all of them are grafted, but what that means is that sometimes you will get part of the original rootstock, like this shoot here, growing from below the graft. And I'll show you the graft now. So if you look down here, I had a rabbit protector on it because you can see that a rabbit or something has tried to nibble around the bark because of the juicy sap that they can feed off. Now if it nibbles all the way around, it will kill the tree, which is why we use these whilst they're growing. But you'll notice here we've got the shoots. Now this isn't part of the graft. This part is the graft, the scion, that's been taken from another green gauge and grafted onto this rootstock here. So these are two separate plants, but this becomes almost like the host of this rootstock, and it helps control its growth. So when you look up here, we've got the greengage, which is part of the plum family, but this isn't. This is from a different plant altogether. So I'm going to nip it off, and I think we've got enough time this year that won't harm the rest of the plant. But if I leave that, it's going to start to take the vigour off this tree. So we don't want that growing, because you end up with two competing trees. Now, I'm going to pop this back on just in case that rabbit comes back. Probably next year, I'll fully remove that. You can see how much the rabbits tried to chew through it. And that will just protect the bark. So I'm just going to add all of this split between the 3 different bins that have been active this year. Now you may also notice that I've put a bit of other green material in there, and that's comfrey. So I've been growing comfrey down here, which I'm going to use for comfrey tea, which is like a high power fertiliser. But it only went in this year, so it's not been that vigorous to give me enough to make comfrey tea, but it will add an amazing amount of nitrogen to my compost bins. So Daniel Fuller has sent in a question asking about his eucalyptus tree. Now he's planted it this year and it's put on quite a lot of growth. He's asking how we can make it bush out to help obscure a neighbouring view. Now eucalyptus trees come from the myrtle plant family, and they're usually found in the forests of Australia. They're incredibly fast growing, and there are plenty of varieties that are really well suited to the UK climate. Now the best way to make this bush out and bulk up, rather than simply reaching for the stars, Daniel, is to hard prune it. And it's probably going to sound really brutal, but based on the photo you've sent me, you ideally want to probably cut off 2/3 of that. Now, if you're not quite ready to lose so much height, you could cut off 1/3, and what that will do is then start to send all the hormones further down the tree, and it will bush out and send out more shoots, giving you a much denser canopy. Now the time to do that is late winter or early spring here in the UK. So I'd leave it alone right now and then follow my pruning guide as to how to hard prune, and that will help you prune your eucalyptus. Now another question that's come in is from Caroline Hanbury, and she's asking when is the best time to prune back roses, in particular rambling ones. Now most roses get pruned late winter, and that's to help condition them to form buds which will then flower the following year. However, rambling roses are slightly different, and the best time to prune those, Caroline, is now, which is late summer or early autumn. If you want some more detail on how to do that, follow my rose pruning guide on my YouTube channel. But you're in essence taking back maybe 1/4 of this year's growth to a set of healthy buds, and you do that now ready for next year, because rambling roses will still flower on old wood, whereas new roses tend to flower less on older wood the older that they get. So another question has been posted by Kim Brownie, who's been asking how best to take cuttings and propagate her azalea. Now she's mentioned in a comment that her azalea has got baby azaleas near the bottom, and she wondered if she could take those and transplant them. Now you could do that, Kim, but the chances of success are probably quite low, because there's a very specific way for taking cuttings and propagating things like azaleas and rhododendrons. So if we have a look behind me here, we've got a very well established rhododendron bush here. Now if you look at the leaves at the top, you'll notice that there are soft fleshy leaves, which are the new growth, and soft buds, and then beneath that you've got a slightly harder yet green bit of growth, and this is this year's growth. Now you can differentiate this year's growth from previous years, because the previous year's goes really brown and woody. And the way to take a cutting, and I'll do a close-up, is to sever off some of this new green growth, and you cut it just below a pair of leaves, because that's where all the hormones are stored. And then you will follow my guide for softwood cuttings, which shows you how to cleanly prepare the cut and to make sure that you're preparing your propagated cuttings for success. But then you pop that into a bit of rooting hormone and into some compost, and you probably want to overwinter it in a greenhouse or a cold frame and keep it well watered throughout the winter but not sodden. And then you should notice by next spring it will have started to root, and you'll notice because at the base of the pot where you put your cuttings you'll see tiny roots protruding from them. Now they are relatively slow to root, but it's a great way of getting identical copies of your favourite azalea or rhododendrons. And now, in late summer, early autumn, is the best time to do it. So if you've got questions on your garden or you want personalised garden design hints and tips, you can either drop me a comment below or follow me on social media. But if you want a special one-on-one hour-long consultation with me, the Garden Ninja, you can book that on my site. It's a really great way to get an hour jam-packed full of hints and tips that are specialised for you and your garden. And if you follow the link to my website, you'll be able to find that service that I offer now. So there we have it, my October garden tour has come to an end for this month. The seasons are changing, the garden's changing with them. There's all sorts of russets and reds and rich colours, and it really is a beautiful time to enjoy the seasonality of gardening. If you've liked this video, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel where there are loads more garden design, hints, tips and hacks to help you make your garden awesome. I've been Garden Ninja, happy gardening.